This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. I'm pleased to introduce the first new Chthonia book's title in almost 4 years, Project Lethy. This book brings back some of the characters from my earlier novel, The Morrigan Timelines, and centers around a young woman named Sydney Duncan who loses her memory under mysterious circumstances, and is able to start a whole new life with her boyfriend, Mark Ryland, in which she is very happy. A chance meeting with someone from her past unravels her new life, testing her relationship with Mark and forcing her to confront a truly horrific past. Project Lethy is now available on Amazon and can be ordered in any bookstore. Visit chthonia.net/publications for details on this book and other Chthonia titles. Hello, this is Breege Burke. Before we get into this week's podcast, I would like to thank my patrons personally: Gwyn K., Politi, Jan H., Tanya T., Veronica S., Gabby, Helen M., Ruth S., Sunny H., Scott K., JRM, Susie G., Eldritch Priest, B. Lupita, C. Roberts, Jeanette, DS, Jake B., CDV, Ali, Thaddeus G., V! V, and Mary Beth R. I really appreciate those of you who have joined recently and who have stuck with me over these years. Our community is small, and there is so much I would like to do in terms of providing courses, conversation on the dark feminine, and extra content, so please consider joining at patreon.com/Chthonia. Now on to the podcast. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast that deals with the dark feminine. I'm Breege Burke, and this week's episode has a little bit of a precursor or a story to it before I get into it. Quite unexpectedly, honestly, because this is not how it's been a highly unpredictable week here. So I'm just going to start, if you'll indulge me, just talking about this first, and you will see how this dovetails into our topic for this week. So I promise you this is not just me rambling about nothing. Okay, so this week where I live in New Jersey, we had a major thunderstorm. Now, obviously, if you live in the northeast of New Jersey, we get thunderstorms. I mean, there's other parts of the country that get far worse things. Yeah, and again, T-storms are pretty normal around here, especially in the spring. But this particular one, and usually the area I live in, by the way, usually avoids the worst of it. I mean, we might have some late lightning, thunder, some rain, but we don't usually have the big negative effects that can come with a big thunderstorm. Well, this one, which some people have theorized may have had a little bit of tornado thrown in, which again is becoming a little more common in New Jersey than I would like. I mean, we're not looking at, F5 tornadoes or anything like that, but we're not generally generally it's the flat areas of the U.S. that get tornadoes, right? And we're not really a very flat area, especially not where I live. So, in any case, this was a very furious wind-driven storm. I mean, there were buckets of water coming down. I mean, I couldn't see out the windows at all. It literally looked like like my house had been stuck in the middle of a waterfall, like it was some Frank Lloyd Wright thing or something. And the net result was that we lost electricity for 2 days, which is why I assumed this podcast was going to be late, because I had no idea when the electric was going to be back on. First they said, it'll be back on at 11:30 in the morning. Then they're like, it'll be back on at 7 at night. And then it's, 11:30 at night. But then I looked at it, I was like, no, not, or 11 or 11:30. It was like, no, they're talking about 11 p.m. the next day, not the same day. And there were traffic lights out for a whole day. It was just a very weird storm and it was covering such a small part of the county that I live in, that it was really odd that we had this storm, and that the electric company was so totally unprepared for it that we didn't that the traffic lights weren't up by the next day. I mean, it literally was just 2 lights. It wasn't like a statewide kind of an event. So I was out without internet, and I was without internet, without electric. Obviously, if there's no electric, there's no internet. But then afterwards, it was just, I don't know. It was just 2 days, and then I had like a major branch fall off one of my trees onto my neighbor's property, and there was a whole thing about moving it, and then we actually had a mini earthquake too, which is just another thing that's not highly uncommon in New Jersey, but we did have and then again, it wasn't a major quake. To me, I thought maybe another branch fell off my tree. This happened at like 3:30 in the morning. But as it turns out, it did not. This was just an earthquake. So I don't want to go on endlessly about how this thing, because eventually by the following night around 7 p.m. they brought the power back. So that was good, and I had spent the day out doing other things. But I was just exhausted from trying to deal with this. I had to move the branch. I mean, my whole body is like bruised from trying to lift this like 9-foot tree branch, 9-foot tree branch. I haven't measured it exactly. It's roughly around that. And eventually somebody came along and helped me move it. But it was just, so I've just, and then I did the night, I because I couldn't have even a fan on, even though the night wasn't really that hot, it was just really impossible to sleep. So I had only gotten like 2 hours of sleep. So in any case, yeah, there was all this stuff connected with the power outage. There were a few good things too, but it was largely that. And then there was this mini earthquake, which was like, as I said, just to kind of spice things up. But the really kind of at the end of it, I was just kind of very, very tired and worn out. And so the morning that I'm recording this, I was spending time doing my normal Saturday stuff, which is getting my house together and getting things organized and just trying to clean up from what's been going on all week. And then I had a YouTube comment that appeared that was another one on the Hecate video that I did. I think that was episode 10. Episodes 10 and 11, I think, were on Hecate. And it was another negative comment because those earlier episodes are not very well edited. I mean, in terms of swallowing and things like that you can hear on the mic. I didn't really edit a lot of that stuff at that time because I was new. I was a new podcaster. I was just basically recording stuff on actually a really good recording system, but I wasn't going through, I was not really attuned to doing proper editing, which I try to do now. This is still a very informal podcast, but I try to do that now. And after I read it, I was just, I don't know why, but something just said to me, you know what, if people are going to give you such a hard time over those early episodes, then just get rid of them. Just get rid of them. And really, we're only talking years worth. We're not talking the whole 5-year catalog of Chthonia. So I trashed other than the Baba Yaga one with Joanna Madlock, which is a really good episode and even quality-wise is really good. So there was no reason to get rid of that one. But the other ones, I just trashed. Now, I do have all these recorded already. I did find the drive where I actually have all these episodes. So probably what I'm going to do is slowly go through and edit these and put them back up rather than re-record them entirely. So they will be back. So those of you who are fans, I did get commentary back from people who said, what is wrong with these people who don't like these episodes? These episodes are great. And yeah, I do have some choice words for the people who don't like the episodes. And at the same time, I do sort of get it to some degree. Because, and again, only because some of the comments, because internet, some of them were unnecessarily nasty about things. And I generally don't reply to comments like that because my reply, having a very Mars-orientated disposition, would be probably out of proportion to the comment itself. And I don't really have a lot of time and energy to spend blowing wind on the internet about stuff like other people. Some of these people seem to. So I just figured, all right, I'm just going to pull them down. I'm going to re-edit them and put them back up. Because nowadays, I was learning something about the YouTube algorithm, and they were saying, okay, if you have negative comments on an episode, okay, then those negative comments can actually now, before it didn't matter. If anybody commented, it was just something that pushed you up in the algorithm so people would see your channel. But they've changed it up so that the AI, if it picks up words that detect that somebody is displeased with your video, then they push it down in the algorithm. So they're really, what I don't like about this is that I feel like it's a free speech issue. If you are somebody who, truthfully, people don't have to like my channel. That's the what we would call in America the First Amendment thing. You should have a right to not like this channel if you don't like it. Although my feeling is if you don't like it, then don't watch it. Don't listen to it. If this is not a format that you enjoy, then don't watch it. But people, I don't feel like people. I need to be censoring people's comments because they're unfavorable. But unfortunately, YouTube makes it so that if somebody does say something unfavorable, they might suppress your video in the algorithm. I said, so now I'm going to be put in the position of having to delete negative comments so that my channel doesn't get kind of blocked in some way. Not really blocked, that's probably an overstatement, but that it's not... that if there's too many people, at least on a particular video, that then this video doesn't get kind of pushed to the background. So I just thought, you know what, let's re-edit them. Let's put them up with the new editing that I do. Same episodes, just cleaner sound. And then that way, hopefully, that will revitalize things and solve the problem. Because I don't really want to I don't want to get rid of episodes on like Hecate and Lilith and the figures that everybody asks me about. And then to just take those episodes away just seems foolish. But that's kind of what I was prompted to do. So that's what I did. Now, you may ask yourself, what does this have to do with today's episode, which is taking me a long time to get to? And this episode is about the Harpies, okay? Now, the Harpies they are representations of storm winds, which is why I say this is a really interesting segue for this. Because if the Harpies they literally represent sudden and unpredictable storms that come in. And of course, I made the decision to do the Harpies, and then we had this sudden unpredictable storm that came in and did these unpredictable things. Plus, we also had some, wind, so to speak, from the comments of people that made me make a decision to just suddenly decide I'm going to redo something entirely different. So, interesting set of synchronicities there, I guess you could say, connected to the Harpies. And yeah, what I want to talk about today with the Harpies, which are, they're basically represented as these creatures, these daemonic creatures, okay? Remember, we're talking about a daemon as being a kind of intermediary spirit. They're daemons connected to the wind. They are related to the wind deities, and of course also to Iris, the goddess of the rainbow. They're sisters of Iris. Which makes sense because a rainbow usually appears after a storm. So they're representations really of this storm energy that we connect them with. And there are a couple of major myths connected to them. Now, the myths that we have, the main one that I've always known of is the one with King Phineas of Thrace, who is in the which is in the Argonautica, the Jason and the Golden Fleece story. So I'm going to talk about that one. The Harpies are also mentioned in the Aeneid, and they are mentioned in a couple of other places. So what I'm going to do is go through the main myths of the Harpies and talk about what they are, and then we're going to talk about their representations and what they mean in terms of how they're understood and what they mean. Now, the name Harpy actually is a word that has to do with snatching, okay? Snatching something. And the very first myth of the Harpies is that of King Phineas. And let me read you I want to see if I can get you the original one here. So let's start with a definition of Harpies from this Dictionary of Classical Myth, the Penguin Dictionary of Classical Myth. And they says the Harpies, or the Snatchers, were winged daemons, the daughters of Thaumas and Electra, or in some versions, Thaumas and Ozomene, which is basically another name for Electra. So that's just a different name. Hesiod names two of them, Aello, sometimes called Nicothoe, and Okapite, but a third, Keleno, was sometimes mentioned, and of course that's the one who's mentioned in Virgil's Aeneid. Homer also mentions a harpy called Podarge. Okay. Their names reflected their nature. Aello means wind squall, Okapite means fast flyer, and Keleno means obscure, like the sky covered with storm clouds, and Podarge means fleet-footed, so very, very fast on their feet. They were depicted as winged women or as birds with women's head and sharp claws. They are said to have lived in the Strophades, islands in the Aegean Sea. Later, Virgil placed them at the entrance to the underworld. Okay, so the snatching aspect of the Harpies is definitely, you're going to see there's a very strong underworld connection here. The Harpies carried off children and souls. All right, now this is interesting. They are sometimes depicted on tombs carrying the soul of the deceased in their claws. They figure prominently in the myth of King Phineas and also in that of Pandarus, and we'll talk about that one as well. They were said to have coupled with the wind god Zephyrus and given birth to two pairs of horses, Xanthus and Ambalius, the horses of Achilles and Phlogius, and Harpagus, the horses of Discuri. So, okay, the wind gods or these goddesses or daemons connected to the wind produce horses as children when they mate with the wind. And when we think about horses and the fact that horses run very fast and are associated with speed, then it seems very, very clear why you might assume that that these magical horses are born of the wind, so to speak, because horses are often valued or considered to be legendary in status because of their speed. Xanthus, too, it is noteworthy, is the horse that tells Achilles of his doom. The horse actually prophesizes and tells him that the moves that he's going to make are going to end his life. And Achilles says to the horse, "Why are you telling me this? I already know this." And then the Furies come and silence the horse, because for a horse to speak, even a magical horse, is outside of the bounds of nature. So the Furies actually put a stop to it. And the Furies also have a connection to the Harpies, but we will get there. So I'm going to go to theoi.com here. The Harpies, that is the swift robbers, are in the Homeric poems nothing but personified storm winds. Homer mentions only one by name, Podarge, who was married to Zephyrus and gave birth to the two horses of Achilles, Xanthus and Balius. When a person suddenly disappeared from the earth, it was said that they were carried off by the Harpies. Thus, they carried off the daughters of King Pandarus and gave them as servants to the Erinyes. Now, I'll tell you Pandarius' story in a bit. I actually want to do Phineas' story first, so let's just go through this. According to Hesiod, the Harpies were daughters of Thaumas by the Oceanid Electra, fair-locked and winged maidens who surpassed winds and birds in the rapidity of their flight. Their names in Hesiod are Aello and Ocapite. But even as early as the time of Aeschylus, they are described as ugly creatures with wings, and later writers carried the notions of the Harpies as far as to represent them as the most disgusting monsters. So interestingly, you have again this idea initially, there is a conception of them, as with the Furies, that they were originally seen as fair maidens, but then they become seen as these ugly, disgusting monsters. They were sent by the gods as a punishment to harass the blind Phineas. And whenever a meal was placed before him, they darted down from the air and carried it off. Later writers add they either devoured the food themselves or that they dirtied it by dropping some stinking substance as to render it unfit to be eaten. They are further described in these later accounts as birds with the head of maidens, long claws on their hands, and with faces pale with hunger. So this is interesting. They're not only representations of the wind, but they seem to also in some way be connected to hunger or to starvation. Now, the other person connected to starvation in Greek myth is Tantalus. And when we look at the myth of Pandarus, we're going to see that there is a connection to Tantalus there. So keep the starvation thing kind of in the back of your mind here. The traditions about their parentage likewise differ in the different traditions. Some called them daughters of Pontus or Poseidon, so connected to the sea. The winds are connected to the sea, and especially storm winds. And Terra, who is, so the idea that the winds are born of earth and sea, okay, in this particular sense. Or of Typhon, who is the Chthonic monster who battles with Zeus in the Gigantomachy. And Typhon is a kind of a dragon. So Typhon represents also these kind of terrible natural forces, and the idea that the storm winds would be born of Typhon is not that far-fetched. Or even of Phineas, which I think is which is interesting. Daughters of Phineas, but then bringing about his starvation. So I don't know. That's a rather interesting idea. Their number is either 2, as in Hesiod and Apollodorus, or 3, but their names are not the same in all writers. And besides those already mentioned, we find Olopos, Nikotoe, Okatoe, Okapode, Kalania, which we've talked about, and Akaloe. So trying to make sure I read these right. I'm not sure if my Greek is as good as it used to be here. Their place of abode is either in the islands called the Stropades, or a place at the entrance of Orcus, which is another name for the underworld, or a cave in Crete. The most celebrated story in which the Harpies play a part is that of Phineas, at whose residence the Argonauts arrived when he was plagued by the monsters. He promised to instruct them respecting the course they had to take if they would deliver him from the Harpies. Okay, so this is the Argonauts. So they come. This is a part of that story where, and you have to remember with Jason on the Argo, at least a couple of the fellow travelers or fellow Argonauts on the boat with him were actually sons of the North Wind. They were connected to Boreas, the North Wind. So Phineas is there. He's starving to death. The Harpies keep snatching his food. And he tells that the Argonauts that he can help them get on their way to where they're going as they're traveling if they would help him deal with the Harpies. When the food for Phineas was laid out on the table, the Harpies immediately came and were attacked by the Boreades, the sons of the west of the North Wind. So the West Wind is being the Harpies, who are associated with storm winds, and at least one of them is married to the West Wind, are being attacked by the sons of the North Wind. Zetes and Calais, who were among the Argonauts, and provided with wings. According to an ancient oracle, the Harpies were to perish by the hands of the Boreades, but the latter were to die if they could not overtake the Harpies. The latter fled, but one fell in the river Tigris, which was hence called Harpies, and the other reached the Encanades. As she never returned, the islands were called Strophades. But being worn out with fatigue, she fell down simultaneously with her pursuer, and as they promised to no further molest Phineas, the two Harpies were not deprived of their lives. Again, in another version, Iris, the goddess of the rainbow, comes in and tells the sons of Boreas to not kill the Harpies, that they are not to do that, they're to leave her alone. Yes, so according to the others, the Boreades were on the point of killing the Harpies when Iris, or Hermaeus in some cases, appeared and commanded the conquerors to set them free, or both the Harpies as well as the Boreades died. Okay, so again, multiple versions of the same myth that can happen. In the famous Harpy monument recently brought from Lycia to this country, the Harpies are represented in the act of carrying out away the daughters of Pandarus. Okay, so we have this idea of the Harpies as soiling the food of Phineas. So they are attached, interestingly, to starvation. Now, that may seem odd at first, but let's think about this for a moment. So if you have a storm that comes through, like the one that came through my area, potentially one of the things that a really strong windstorm can do, now obviously in ancient Greece they didn't have to worry about their electric and internet going out, right? But storms certainly have the potential to destroy crops. So when they come in, it's almost like they come in and have the effect of spoiling crops, of toppling trees, of doing things so that one is not able to have the fruits or the yields of the field. So in this sense, they are associated with starvation, with the idea that the fruits produced by the earth or by the labors of people working the earth are snatched away in some fashion. Okay, and so with Phineas, he is tormented by the Harpies in this fashion. So let's see. So let's see. So let's look at Homer for a minute. In Homer's Odyssey, Penelope, the wife of Odysseus, laments at one point late in the Odyssey, like this is around book 20. She said, "Or else if a Thuela or a storm wind, therefore meaning a harpy, might snatch me up," she says, "carry me through dusky pathways and cast me down at the issuing place of backward flowing Okeanos, or the ocean. Let it be said that when the Thueli, or the storm winds, or the Harpies, bore off the daughters of Pandarus, the gods long before had slain their parents, and the girls were left orphans in their house. But Lady Aphrodite had nurtured them. But when Aphrodite went to high Olympus to entreat Zeus to let these girls attain the moment of happy marriage, meanwhile the Harpies snatched them away and delivered them to the ministrations of the detested Erinyes, or the Furies. In the selfsame fashion, may the Olympians cause me to vanish from the world." So Penelope, of course, is lamenting as she is now in this position of having to choose a suitor when she's not sure her husband is dead, and so she remains faithful to Odysseus. So this is part of her lament that, let the Harpies come and snatch me away, as they did the daughters of Pandarus. Okay, so in an earlier episode of the Odyssey, around book 10, the Harpies, when there's a recounting by Odysseus of him and his crew landing on the island of Aeolus, who is another king connected to the winds, and who he takes all the unfavorable winds and puts them in a bag so that they can get on their ship and get home. But the men, not knowing what's in the bag, decide to open it, and it blows the ship straight back to the island. And then he says, "Well, I don't know what misfortune or what curse you have that brought you back here, but I'm not helping you again after that." So, of course, this is why mainly Odysseus gets screwed a lot by his men in the Odyssey, by doing things that they are not supposed to do, and thus setting them back and keeping him adrift after the Trojan War is over for another 7 years. Okay, so this is from Homer's Odyssey. It says, "The Harpies were possibly numbered among the winds commanded by Aeolus. Aeolus, son of Hippotas, the deathless gods counted him their friend. His island is a floating one. All around there's a wall of bronze, unbreakable, and rock rises sheer above it. 12 children of his live in the palace with him. 6 are daughters, perhaps the storm winds, or would be similar to the Harpies. 6 are sons, perhaps the anemoi, the directional winds. In the prime of youth, moreover, the king has given his daughters as wives to his sons. These all hold a continual feast with their dear father and much-loved mother. Countless dainties are there before them, and through the daytime the whole is rich with savory smells and murmurs with the sound of music. At night they sleep, each with his own chaste wife, on inlaid bedsteads covered above them. Chronion, son of Kronos, that's Zeus, made him warden of all the winds, each of them to rise or fall at his pleasure. Okay, so we don't need to go into the story of Aeolus, but he's a king who is associated with being able to control the directions of the winds. So if we go through here, okay, the other discussion here, because there's a number of discussions of the Argonautica that we've talked about. Okay, so the question you might have is, why is Phineas being attacked in this way by the Harpies? Because obviously the gods are the ones who were sending the Harpies to attack Phineas. And according to this Dictionary of Classical Myth, it says, having the powers of divination, so being able to divine, see the future, Phineas chose to have a long life at the price of going blind. And of course, as we all know, blindness is connected with prophecy. In indignation, the sun sent the Harpies to plague him. In other versions, Phineas abused his gifts as a seer and revealed the plans of the gods to mortals. Yeah, and usually when you do that, when you reveal the secrets of the gods, they get very, very annoyed with you and do things that are not very nice. In other versions, Phineas... another account claims he had incurred divine wrath by aiding Phrixus. Everything that was put before Phineas was snatched away by the Harpies. Okay, so Phineas, it seems pretty clear, has done things to offend the gods, and this is why the Harpies are plaguing him. And as I've mentioned, they're plagued with starvation, okay? And this is something that also Tantalus is plagued with for trying to test the gods by cooking and killing his own son and feeding him, trying to pass him off as some other kind of meat. And of course, the gods realize this is human flesh and they're horrified, but the only one who takes part in his son, Tantalus' son, is called Pelops. The only ones who eat the flesh of Pelops is Demeter. She takes a bite out of his shoulder. She's the only one. And so thus, when Tantalus is punished, Pelops is restored to life, but his shoulder is missing because Demeter has eaten it, and so they replace it with an ivory shoulder. But this is the beginning of the sort of cannibalistic corruption of the line of the House of Atreus, which is connected to the city or the tribal kingdom of Mycenae. And Agamemnon, of course, is the king that we associate with Mycenae, but his father is Atreus, and Atreus also commits the act of cannibalism when he fights with his brother for the kingship, and it belongs to Atreus. It's stolen from him by his brother Thyestes, but then through this miraculous set of events, Atreus gets the kingship back and punishes Thyestes by cooking and killing his nephew and feeding it to him at a feast. Feeding him to his father at a feast, at which point Thyestes curses him. And when he goes to the oracle of Apollo to ask how to avenge himself, tells Thyestes that he needs to have sex with his own daughter. So yeah, anyway, it's a highly corrupt affair, and of course that the myths of the House of Atreus, that this idea of cannibalism is one of the things. However, Tantalus also is somebody who has the intimacy of the gods, in the sense that he is treated as more than an ordinary mortal, and he betrays the trust, which is apparently what Phineas has also done to earn him this particular punishment. But Tantalus actually gets sent to the underworld, sent to Tartarus, and his punishment is to stand in a pool of water and have a fruit tree hanging above him with luscious fruit that's very low hanging, but anytime he reaches down to the water to take a drink, the pool recedes from him, and anytime he reaches up to take a piece of fruit, the tree pulls away from him. So he is eternally hungry and thirsty. He's tormented by the fact that this nice stuff is in front of him, but he can never achieve it. And that's where we get the word tantalizing from, the idea that it's tantalizing. It's something that we desire, but it's out of our reach. And so this is it. So this actually connects to the other story of the Harpies about Pandarus. So let me explain this story to you. When Rhea, who is the wife of Kronos, in the original Titanomachy story about the Titans fighting the Olympians, or before this actually, when Rhea, fearing that Kronos would eat the baby Zeus, hid him in a mountain cave in Crete, she gave him a nanny goat to suckle him and a magic golden dog to guard him. Okay, we have a golden dog here, so that's interesting. Once Kronos had been dethroned, the dog was assigned to guarding the sanctuary of Zeus on Crete. Pandarus stole the dog and took it to Mount Sipyle in Lydia and entrusted it to Tantalus. When he asked Tantalus for his dog back, Tantalus swore on oath that he had never seen it. Okay, so Tantalus, again, there's additional betrayal here of lying. And these were the days when you couldn't just casually cross your fingers behind your back and break an oath. If you break an oath, it's very serious business. To punish them, Zeus changed Pandarus into a rock and buried Tantalus under Mount Sipyle. Okay, in another version, the dog had been entrusted to Tantalus, but it was Hermes who came to fetch it for Zeus. Tantalus swore that he had never seen the dog, but Hermes found the animal. Zeus then punished Tantalus as in the previous version. Pandarus was afraid when he learned what happened to Tantalus and fled with his wife, Harmothoe, and his daughters. He went to Athens and then to Sicily. Zeus killed both him and his wife. His daughters were then abducted by the Harpies. Okay, so when we go back to Penelope's story, the idea is that these children were left orphans. And in the story Penelope tells in the Odyssey, these girls were taken care of by Aphrodite, the goddess of love. But so when she decides, okay, the parents are gone, they committed their crime, but she wanted the daughters to have an honorable marriage, instead the Harpies snatch them away and take them to be with the Furies. So this is yet another aspect of the Harpies. We see them associated with storm winds, and we see them associated with starvation. Now they are associated with carrying these girls off to the underworld. Now, if you recall what I had said in the podcast on the Aeori frequently became assistants of the Furies, or the Erinyes as they were called, which is the Greek name for them. And the Erinyes, of course, live in the underworld. They're definitely connected to boundary setting, particularly when it comes to family stuff, which is why they pursue Orestes for the crime of matricide. Sarah Iles Johnston had pointed out about the Furies that they tended to avenge or get revenge, or they tended to torment people in connection with matters of ancestry or kinship. So if you did something to your fellow kinsfolk, then the Furies would come after you, particularly when it had to do with the females in particular. But if it was somebody who was married into the family, so let's just say it was a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law, they didn't really pay so much attention to that. It had to do more with the direct ancestral line. They didn't care so much about the in-laws. They cared more about the direct family line. And one of the things about the Aeori, or the restless dead, female dead, who usually became assistants of the Furies because they died without having fulfilled their conjugal duty, so to speak. They didn't have children. They didn't marry. So if you died a virgin, then you would become an assistant of the Furies, because you would now be involved in this task of dealing with these ancestral boundaries and tormenting those who did not maintain the proper, whatever the proper limitations were within the family situation. So that's interesting that these girls who are orphaned, because both their parents are killed for their role in stealing this golden dog that was guarding this birthplace of Zeus, or this cave on Crete. Now, if we think about the symbolism of the dog, where else do we see dogs associated? We see Kerberos, the three-headed dog that guards the gate of the underworld. We see the dogs of Hecate. Okay, we see the idea of the hounds of Hecate. And it's also interesting to note that the Harpies are also often known as the hounds of Zeus. So they have a dog connection themselves. But there certainly seems to be this connection to the underworld, but they also seem to have this function. Like, we see this in many cultures. We see this in the Aztec culture. We see it in Egyptian culture, where the idea of a dog or a jackal or some kind of dog-like being is kind of underworld guide. And this golden dog ends up guarding a cave. Okay, so there's something, even though this is a golden dog, so presumably when something is golden, we're dealing with something that has to do with something that's light. Although you could argue that gold may have to do with treasure and what's under the earth as well, because you can mine gold from under the earth. But this seems to be a dog that is connected to, there seems to be this idea of the dog who is either a guardian or one that is a guide. It's connected to this liminal space. And so for somebody to steal this golden dog and then try to pretend and lie about having it, okay, then there's... And then, of course, this is something that's punishable by Zeus. This is not, again, we're all dealing in things that humans don't have a right to be involved in. Or if the gods give you the privilege of knowing something or being involved with something, there's these certain boundaries that you don't cross. And the Furies, as enforcers of boundaries, it's not really surprising that the Daughters of Pandarus get taken away to become the assistants of the Furies or to be with the Furies. So this gives the Harpies that they end up being part of this group of enforcers, as we often see with daemonic spirits. They're often called upon the gods to either provide vengeance for something or to create justice, to create an adjustment. And if we think of them as psychological forces, oftentimes they would have to do with the kinds of torments of conscience that we might actually have. But the Harpies, okay, you have to think about the fact that these are women who have the heads that are supposed to be the heads of old women, okay? Or again, just like the Furies initially being shown as beautiful maidens and then later being shown as these monstrous kinds of creatures, as we start to see the Chthonic feminine as something terrifying rather than as something beautiful. But these bird-like creatures, and again, sirens are actually quite similar. You have this idea of these creatures that have a beautiful head, but the rest of them is something clearly that's more monstrous, or clearly shows that they are not actual human women. There's the idea of them being winged creatures goes back to the words that we have for soul. The word for soul, we think about the word anima in Greek mythology, in the Roman, this is the term that we have for soul. And the words for soul are all connected to wings or winged creatures. If you look at the Babylonian or Sumerian stories, the soul was often considered to be kind of a dusty figure because the underworld was considered to be a very dusty place. But they were always portrayed as having wings. Even now when we think about the idea, you'll talk about when somebody dies that they get their wings to go to heaven, right? Or even when we talk about underworld as hell, you often think about demonic creatures as having bat wings. There's always this idea of wings connected to these chthonic creatures. And in fact, certainly there was a conception of demons, particularly air demons, as some of the older gods were understood. Like Morrigan at one point as the Bave or Bove, depending on how you want to say it, modern Irish or older Irish, is a crow. She's a winged creature, and so this was considered to be. There's definitely this connection here to the soul and the flight of the soul, and the traveling of the psyche or the psyche, which is distinct from the eidolon, which is distinct from the part of our soul that the shade that goes to the underworld when we die. There's a substantial part of our soul that flies, and so the Harpies as winged creatures are connected with snatching souls. This is one of their functions. They're also connected, as was noted in one of these definitions, as snatching children, which again connects them to the chthonic figures of the Lamia, of Marmo, of Gello, or Mormo. Sorry, I always say Marmo. It's Mormo and Gello, and these other creatures that are also hideous in appearance frequently, but are connected with the stealing of children. And so the idea that you have these creatures that would steal souls indicates this. Again, there's this connection here with an early death. And again, if you think of them as stormbringers, that's not such a weird conception, because the idea is that when the storm comes raging through, that these are beings that will potentially take souls with them, and probably before their time. If you're caught out in a really bad storm, death is possible. Even now, when people tell you, well, there's a storm, take shelter. Think about a tornado, for instance. If you want to talk about really vicious storm winds, you're in the path of that. You're lucky if you come out alive at the end of that, or if your property comes out in one piece. So, I mean, I don't know that there were tornadoes in ancient Greece, but nonetheless, you understand that violent, destructive winds can be something, and this is something that's very, very uncontrollable. There's really not much that you can do about it when they come in. And certainly for a seafaring people, the idea of storm winds or violent winds needing to appease them would definitely be a big component of their beliefs, or of what they are trying to manage. But these are the spirits of this unpredictable wind that comes in. Now this really gets back to the idea of daemonic force or natural force as something that's outside of your control. When you take a figure like Zeus or Hera or any of the 12 Olympians, they have personalities to them that, to a certain degree, at least the way they're represented in the stories, they sound almost like they could be. This is why a lot of people thought of these gods as being representations of humans, right? That they're just glorified superhumans, which they're not, by the way. But because of the way they behave as something that you, as a force, as a civilizing force, something you can reason with, something you can rationalize, where somebody could say a prayer and make a kind of a offering to these gods, and that prayer might reasonably be heard. Now, again, the gods may or may not listen to your prayer. If they just decide they don't like you, they don't care what you offer them. They'll just be like, yeah, whatever. You're just, your army's not going to win today anyway. Or sometimes the plea can fall on deaf ears, depending. It's not a guarantee. There's no, even though you try to make the pact with the gods, there's no guarantee that the gift that you are offering will be received. You as a human don't necessarily. That's why I think a lot of times you would see the ancients making deals with these more chthonic or more elemental beings, because the gods themselves really didn't have a reason to traffic with you. But you might try to get some of these other forces on your side, or to help you in some fashion. So, but then again, the other piece of that is that beings like the Harpies they're beings that are only going to be commanded by the gods. They're not going to be commanded by people. You're not necessarily going to be able to appease them. Okay. Now let me just get into the last story that we have here that is connected to the Harpies. And this has to do with Aeneas, and this is in the Aeneid. And this is Aeneid chapter 3, because it seems like it's fairly early on. Okay, so Aeneas is describing a voyage past the Strophades Islands, where dreadful Celaeno and her coven of Harpii, or Harpies, dwell. Now the house of Phineas is barred, and in fear they have left their pristine banquets. Okay, so again, that's a reference back to Phineas. No viler monstrosity than they, no pest more atrocious did ever the wrath of God conjure up out of hell's swamp. Bird-bodied, girl-faced things they are. Abominable in their droppings, their hands are talons, their faces haggard with hunger insatiable. Okay, so again, we have this idea of them being connected not only with storm winds, but also with hunger. So that's why I said I feel like they're connected to the kinds of damage to crops, to livestock, to everything that is connected with storms. When we had made our landfall and entered port, we observed abundant herds of cattle dotted over the vale, and goat flocks browsing there without any goat herd by them. We slaughtered some. We invited Jove, or Zeus, and other gods to take their share of the spoil. Then by the winding shore, seated on makeshift benches, we are most richly feasting, but the next moment we hear a hoarse vibration of wing beats. The Harpies are upon us, horribly swooping down from the mountains. They tear the banquet to pieces, filthying all with their bestial touch. Hideous the sounds, nauseous the stench about us. We choose a secluded spot under an overhanging crag, enclosed by trees in their shifting shadows, to set up our tables and again light a fire and on a new altar. Again from their hidden lairs, flying in from different angles, the noisy coven claws at the feast, hovering around it, their mouths tainting the meal. So then I ordered my friends to stand to arms, for we must fight this damnable brood. They did as they were ordered. They put their shields out of sight beside them. So when the creatures again came screeching round the bay, Messenius from an observation post above us blew the alarm. My friends went into an unfamiliar combat, trying their steel on sinister birds of the sea, but the blows did not make them turn a feather. Their bodies would not be wounded. They simply flew off at high speed into the blue, leaving a half-devoured feast and their own disgusting traces. Kaleno alone, perching on a rock pinnacle, stayed behind and broke into speech, a fortune-teller of evil. So you're willing to go to war, sons of Laomedon, over the cattle you slaughtered, over slain bullocks, prepared to drive us innocent Harpiae out of our rightful domain. Very well, take these words to heart and never forget them. When the Father foreshadowed to Phoebus Apollo, and he to me, will I, the chief of the Furies, reveal to you. Okay, so here now they're connecting the Harpies with the Furies directly. You are making all speed for Italy, and the winds won over. To Italy you shall go, even enter port you may, but before you can wall your promised city, outrageous famine shall fasten upon you, in return for trying to kill us, and force you to chew your tables, yes, gnaw at them and devour them. She spoke, winged away to the sheltering forest. As for my friends, their blood went cold with the shock of panic and curdled, their hearts sank. No more fighting, they said. Through vows and prayers alone we must seek security, whether those creatures are of heaven or uncanny birds of ill omen. So, interesting. Now, the thing is, when it came to eating the tables, there's actually a different scene in the Aeneid where it turns out that this omen is really just a metaphor. There's actually no famine brought upon them. But think about how the curse of Harpies is a curse of famine. So we are okay. So let's get back to the idea of them as these female creatures with bird bodies. So it's almost like they're female representations of death, because if the soul the soul of the dead person is represented as having wings, then certainly, and of course they're also representations of the wind, so they will be flying anyway, but there's definitely a connection between them and the idea of the winged soul. Then the idea of be representing them as a hag or an old woman again conveys this idea of barrenness, that the Harpies have to do with being barren, with not being able, with not being fertile, not being able to produce things. But because they're also connected with the storm winds and the swiftness of the storm that comes in and the unpredictableness of it, like an earthquake, like a tsunami, or some kind of a fierce event on the sea. They represent these terrors that one can face from the natural world. And because they may come in, so the idea of the Harpies coming in and soiling your food probably has a lot to do, again, with them destroying your livelihood, your fields, the way in which they can, if you have a major storm where you have major rain and thunder and lightning, and then you have all these ferocious winds, literally you can have an entire field of crops that you've carefully planted and cultivated. They can completely be torn to pieces. Your whole crop could be ruined and could die. So I feel like the Harpies represent these storm forces that can bring starvation upon a people. We hear a lot about agricultural rituals. Now, the reality is, in ancient times, we don't know how any of these rituals really went. I mean, we might have some accounts of some of them in different places. As you get into these more state-orientated societies, when you have writing and so forth. But nonetheless, there seems to be we definitely seem to have the idea that either something around one's livestock or one's herds or around one's crops, the things that are required for you to be able to eat, for you to be able to live and not starve to death, are certainly connected either to your livestock or to your crops. And that a lot of ritual may have centered around the idea of making sure that this was prosperous, that your crops grew and that they were healthy, and that you didn't have terrible storms or droughts or anything else that came in and would destroy it for you, or that you would have any kind of a situation like an illness or a pox or a plague that would destroy your livestock. And of course, only a portion of these goods were always sacrificed back to the gods. The idea was, well, in return for you giving this to me, I'm giving you your portion of what you have given to me. Early creation myths suggest that these things were put on the earth and humans were created to maintain them. And of course, This is so the gods didn't have to work and the gods got their share, right? This was kind of the idea. So the Harpies coming as a punishment often, again, has to do with this idea of them coming in to punish you when you... maybe not in the case of Aeneas so much. And Aeneas is... But the other ones... let me talk about Aeneas in a minute. These other ones, it's like they've done something to offend the gods in a big way, where they have had the trust of the gods that has been violated. So it's almost like a pact that's been violated. And so then the Harpies come in. So the idea is violating your pact with the gods, at least one of the results you could have is starvation. Now with Aeneas and his men, they're choosing from these flocks and they're eating it. And then the Harpies come in and they destroy it. They soil everything. But Aeneas hasn't actually done anything in this case, nor his men. They're just there in this place. Now, we don't know if these flocks technically belong to the Harpies or had something to do with them. I don't know. It's not really made clear there. Virgil uses a lot of the motifs from earlier writing, like from Homer and from other places, to create the Aeneid, which is an epic that is meant to glorify ancient Rome and meant to glorify the Julian family and Caesar Augustus in particular. But he uses a lot of elements, and Aeneas being the Trojan hero who has come back and the son of Aphrodite, so he definitely has this. He also has this divine lineage to him. Aeneas is a different type of hero, though, because the Romans were so particularly concerned with the Pax Romana, of wanting to have a peace after years and years of civil war. When the Aeneid is written, it's written with the idea that war is not a good thing. When the Iliad was written in particular, the Odyssey is really post-war, but Iliad's about the Trojan War. There's definitely this idea of the glory of war, what they call kleos, the idea of glorification or immortality gained through your deeds in war and in battle. The Aeneid is different because the whole tone of the Aeneid is that Aeneas is a pious man. He is a son of Aphrodite, which definitely gives him a slightly more feminine bent. And so, therefore, he is very, very concerned with not only interpreting signs and omens around him, but also of making sure he observes pious ritual. He is always thoughtful about making the appropriate sacrifices and things like that. And it's actually Juno, who is the Roman version of Hera, who makes his life difficult, mainly because he was fought on the side of Troy. And she, of course, hated the Trojans, and this is her thing. She knows what Aeneas' fate is. She knows he's going to found a city. The city he founds is called Alba Longa, and then later on Alba Longa becomes Rome, or at least it's connected to Rome. It's very nearby there. And so he has this great destiny ahead of him, and of course that's talked about a lot through the Aeneid. And of course, Aeneas is connected to the Julian family, which was the kind of ruling family with the Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, and so forth. But the idea was that he was a capable warrior, but he was not interested in fighting. He was interested in expanding and creating something new. But Hera basically said she was going to get in there and make that very, very difficult for him. And it's not until at the end of these battles that Zeus finally says to, or really it's Jupiter or Jove says to her, okay, enough with your tormenting Aeneas. And then she goes, okay, I'll stop. And her only condition was with her husband, which says, the only request I'm going to make is that they don't take on the language of the Trojans, that they, or the Greeks, or that they actually keep, because this was a place called Latinum, and that the idea was that they would keep the Latin language. Now, Latin now we associate with like Latin America, with South America, right? Or with people who are of Latina or Latinx descent or nationality. But Latin is actually, as we know, that the language of ancient Rome was called Latin. So that's where that connection comes from. But so Aeneas is very, very pious, and he does end up getting into a terrible war where a lot of young people are lost. And there's a lot made of the fact that you have these boys who were just very, tender at the age of 18 or whatever, just suddenly dying and being killed for no good reason. And the Furies are involved in that as well. They go and they place a serpent in the heart of Turnus, who is the one suitor for I think her name is Lavinia, who is then given by her father to Aeneas, because there's a prophecy that Aeneas is the foreigner who's going to come in and build up the city. So he knows he needs to give his daughter to her, but she was already engaged to Turnus. And Turnus is ready to just say, okay, you know what, I yield to the prophecy. But then Juno sends the Furies to Alecto in particular to plant this serpent in his heart, and it makes him decide he's going to go to war over it. And there's a lot of destruction as a result. So So the Harpies end up coming into play here. So they have this kind of prophesizing. They prophesize famine, but the famine doesn't actually happen. Nonetheless, there is definitely a foreboding there of something that's going to happen. Something that, uninvited, perhaps there's a foreshadowing that this is going to bring about a very troublesome result that could result in certainly death and loss. It wasn't famine specifically. It was almost like that. There ended up being a symbolic taking away of that famine, which is interesting. But they come in and they really seem to attack Aeneas for no reason here. We don't know if they were sent by Juno. We don't know if it's just they walked into an area where the Harpies were and they started to screw with them. So it's hard to say because that doesn't have a real direct connection to things, but that is the other place where we see the Harpies represented. So we basically have three elements there. We have them connected to starvation. We definitely have them connected to storm winds and the destruction of very fast-moving and unpredictable winds. You can also step back and think of it as unpredictable events. The way that something can come in all of a sudden and mess up the best laid plans, mess up everything that you have worked for, right? This can represent those forces that may come in and when you've worked hard for something, money you've worked hard for, and then all of a sudden something happens and you got to spend all the money you have to take care of something, or maybe something gets stolen, or there's just a whole series of things that can happen to us that, in spite of our hard work and our best laid plans, that can all be lost in an instant due to something that's very, very unpredictable. And that's what I think the Harpies can represent here. And in particular, they seem to be connected to starvation and to famine. So their connection to Tantalus in particular, or Pandarus and his connection to Tantalus, it seems to be very interesting here in that context, since Tantalus is definitely emblematic of eternal hunger and thirst. So interesting subject that we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. Again, if you enjoy this podcast, I want to say thank you to my patrons. I do have a Patreon, patreon.com/Chthonia. If you would like to become a subscriber, definitely, visit. And I do have extra episodes, bonus episodes, podcasts and things, and, some free merch and some other things that I give out as part of my Patreon rewards. I do also offer mini courses, but the ones I have right now, I'm like, I really need to bolster what's available there. But I'm doing more and more. And of course, people on Patreon always get the whatever I might post elsewhere, they get the bigger picture on Patreon of everything that's going on with Chthonia and the future plans and so forth. So definitely consider joining if you're not a patron already. And if you don't follow me on social media, my social media is Chthonia Podcast. One word on X and on Instagram. I'm mainly on Instagram. I'm not on X that much. But I'm on Instagram a lot. Facebook, it's 2 words, Chthonia Podcast. And it's just Chthonia on YouTube, though also you can find it at Chthonia Podcast, 1 word. My website is chthonia.net, where you can find all of the podcasts and you can find all of my publications. And when I have a link to my new school that I'm actually forming right now, and I will have more information about that coming up, that will also be available on my website as well. Thank you so much again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.